Good to be here. Always good to be here. Welcome to a brand new episode of Matt's Art Chat. I'm Matt McCucci, and I'm the host of the show. I apologize if you're watching this introduction on the video version of this podcast for the weird camera angle. I'm having some weird technical difficulties, but we carry on anyways. In this episode, I'm joined by Raven Kaliana, who is a puppeteer and a puppet maker. And it was really interesting for me because I don't believe that I've ever had the chance to talk with anyone who works within this particular field of the arts or with this particular art form. In this podcast, she actually talks a lot about her theories on puppetry being a very powerful tool in talking about human rights. In fact, a lot of her puppet-based theatre and film productions have done much to raise awareness of children's rights. So we talk about some of that work. We also talk about how art has throughout her life been a powerful tool that has helped her understand and communicate with the world around her. And we talk about lots of other things. So like I said, it was a very fascinating conversation for me to record, and I hope that you will enjoy listening to it. So without further ado, let's begin. Well, hello, Raven.
Hi, Matt.
Hello. It's great to hear you. It's good to talk with you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
No, I'm excited.
Excellent. Well, first of all, where in the world are you right now?
Near Brighton.
Oh, near Brighton. Yeah.
In
So
United Kingdom. Yes.
In the United Kingdom. Is that where you're originally from?
No, it's not. No, I grew up in the Western United States, and then I moved to England about 12 years ago.
These are crazy times that we're living in at the moment. How are you currently dealing with them?
Well, I've actually been pretty busy. I'm working on a puppet making project right now. It's a big polar bear for a show that's about climate change and also about empathy for other people. So it's called A Nice Thing to Say.
I wanted to start off this interview by just asking you basically, when did you discover an interest in puppetry? It's kind of the standard question, but I think it's a good place to start.
Well, I have to say, I grew up watching Sesame Street, which I think probably taught me how to read about a year earlier than other people. And I remember like one of my first childhood drawings. In fact, the first recognizable childhood drawing that I did when I was about 3 years old was of one of the Muppets. I wasn't obsessed with puppets or puppetry when I was growing up, but I did love art, and I just drew pictures constantly, and I sculpted, and but I just did art just constantly all the time, like, every spare moment. If I look at an old, sheet of paper from when I was a kid, like, like something I did in my classroom or something, there's like drawings all around the margins. It's like I just couldn't stop. So I think I used art as kind of like an escape a little bit, or a way to process things that were happening to me when I was growing up. And it was also a good way to help connect with other people. It was like kind of like a language for me, because I was quite introverted, and so I wasn't very good at I didn't really want, the attention of standing up and, talking all the time. I wanted to have, kind of closer or more meaningful connections with people. And so drawing, it was really interesting because people would start to talk about, what is this about? Or, so it was kind of a little bit more about meaning instead of just, this is what I think. And when I was a teenager, I was going through a very, very, very rough time. And I started to use my art more to explore my inner states and emotions, and more as like a processing tool. And when I was in my early 20s, I did a lot of art that, again, was like just like emotional processing. But I also wanted to reconnect it back to the community. So then I would put it in exhibitions, and I'd have some little piece of text next to it that explained what it was about and try to like engage people in conversations about it. I didn't really discover puppetry until after I'd graduated from university and moved to San Francisco, where I got hired as a staff puppeteer at Folkmanis Puppets. It was just completely out of the blue. I didn't have any experience, working puppets or anything like that. It was kind of entry level, but they taught me how to do it, and they design and make puppets. So it was it was just an amazing job, really. Just like completely life-changing job. Wonderful people to work for. They just took really good care of their employees. And people were like really happy there. A lot of people like really loved their jobs. And it was just so inspiring to see that, because, it's like most places you might work, when you're that age, people are like, slinging pizzas or something like that. And it's just hating the world instead of, wow, it's like, look at this thing that I made. What do you think? It's just wonderful to be part of that. So I was a support to the design team. They would come in with new puppet design. They'd be like, Raven, what do you think of this? And, because they knew I was an artist. And so I would like, play with it, or, I would kind of get to give some feedback about it. And it was just delightful doing that. And after a few years, I realized, oh, well, I love art, and I love the potential of puppetry to communicate with people about things that are meaningful. I wonder if I could create my own puppets and maybe my own shows. And then it sort of gelled like, oh, right. Well, this is a way that I can actually communicate about issues that I care about, such as child protection, human trafficking, trauma recovery, and that it's something that people have less of a defense, like a less of a mental defense when they see it, because it's so original and unlike other things that they've seen, because you can make quite original looking puppets, and people are like, what am I looking at? So it's sort of, they're immediately kind of called to the present, and they see this, thing in motion that's sort of a person and sort of not a person, but they're kind of more aware or engaged or curious than they would be if they were just seeing an actor on a stage. And from there, I went on to write. Well, basically, I moved to England. I collaborated with a team to write a show about human trafficking that uses puppets and shows the experience. It's on child trafficking, and the children in the story are represented by puppets.
I just want to go back to like you discovering a love of the arts early on in your life, and just seeing it as a way that you could communicate with the world and maybe understand the world too. But those experiences that you had first working for, I guess, a production company that used puppetry as well, was that like the first period in which you realized that that could actually also be your career path? Or did you always imagine that you'd more or less, want to start a career within the arts, and that it would be possible too?
Well, I mean, when I was growing up, I thought I would probably become a painter when I grew up. And, I did think that I would become a professional artist, but I thought I would probably just be painting, since I did a lot of that. But when I got hired at Folkmanis Puppets, which is a puppet maker, they make puppets and sell them. It was already like, a dream job. Like I loved being there. And I did think of that as like, oh, wow, I found my calling. This is it. But I didn't realize that it was, it was in the realm of puppetry, but it was that puppetry could be a way to tell stories about things that I felt were important, that I needed to communicate with the world, and that I wanted to open some conversations with adults in ways they weren't expecting, and with a medium they wouldn't be expecting.
And so did you also have a background in acting, writing, or any of the performing arts?
No. I mean, I'd always, I wrote a lot. I wrote all the time. When I was in my 20s, I just wrote, kind of processing. So the thing is, my activism work through puppetry comes from, wanting to raise awareness around child abuse issues, because I was trafficked as a child and had to escape. And so the writing was all about kind of processing, emotional processing stuff. So I didn't really think of myself as being like a writer of short stories or anything like that, because it was almost like, writing in your journal or your diary or something. But kind of after things sort of crystallized for me in terms of using the medium of puppetry to tell an autobiographical story about children being trafficked and opening conversations about change with the audience on those topics, I realized that I needed to build up a whole lot of different skills to, be able to, be in a position to do that. And so I did take all sorts of workshops, writing, storytelling, script writing. I took all kinds of improvisation classes and sort of action theater. I didn't really take any acting per se courses, but it was more like I felt like that puppets are so amazing at conveying emotion that as long as, I was conveying things in an honest way, then the audience could respond to it. And that is how it worked. I didn't ever take acting classes.
Why do you think puppets are so effective at conveying these messages? Or do you think also that there are some misconceptions about puppetry that perhaps surprises people once they encounter some of the works that you've mentioned that you do regarding also some really delicate issues and themes?
Well, it is a bit unfortunate that there's kind of been puppetry's kind of an oppressed medium, basically. There's an amazing guy named John Bell who wrote a book about the way that puppetry for adults has been suppressed as a medium because it is so effective at, for instance, political satire or engaging people. It's an amazing way to approach a difficult issue in a one step removed kind of way. So what historically has happened is that whenever puppetry got mainstream support, then it went into puppetry for adults. And it was common to see puppets in a theater. But with that type of medium, it's also easy to do, political critique, or, it's like people can say things with the puppets that they wouldn't be able to say in person. And they can always say, oh, it's just a joke. Oh, the puppet said it, not me. And, so you can get around a repressive political regime by using puppets. And that's also happened with, political protests as well. So demonstrations, a lot of times people will use giant puppets in demonstrations. And the reason for that is that people will look at the new. They will look at this being that they've never seen before. Their attention is called to it. So it's a way to, and also, the press will, of course, photograph the thing as well. So it's a way to, they might not photograph some, individual in the crowd, but they'll photograph a giant puppet if they see one. So it's a way that you can kind of jump over the fence that's created around you to keep you small and ineffective, because puppets can be made out of cardboard and paper mache. You can make them out of anything. And it's a way to have a bigger voice than your individual voice.
You also make puppets. You're also a puppet maker. And I was wondering what are the materials that you use, and I guess how long it can take you to create or make one of these puppets.
Well, it depends on the puppet entirely. I make all sorts of different puppets. I make, shadow puppets. I can make really, really simple shadow puppets. I can make one in 5 minutes. But if
What is that? Actually, yeah, that's
it's just
interesting
cut
because what
paper.
is a
It's just cut paper.
oh, right.
But you can make, elaborate mechanisms and things like that. So the polar bear I'm making now has like a opening and shutting mouth, and it's almost life size. It's a very big puppet. So there's a lot of, kind of technical things that go into it. And if I'm making a larger puppet or even just a medium-sized puppet, usually I'll make kind of like a wooden scaffold or skeleton inside of it. That all has to work in the same way that a human skeleton works. It has to bend in the right places and stop bending in the right places, and it has to be sturdy, to actually hold up the structure. And sometimes that's the most difficult part. And then there's sort of like sculpting over on top of it. So, could be a sculpted face, could be sewn. It just depends on the puppet.
No, so does that also mean that you're required to have a basic grasp of human anatomy?
Oh, I think it helps a lot. No, I usually tell people that, like a life drawing class is very important to puppet making, because you learn how the body moves and how it doesn't move.
Is puppet making a part of the process that you also enjoy?
I do love it, but sometimes it's frustrating too. But sort of like when I'm at the end of the process of making the thing, usually I just feel like kind of elation, so it seems like all the kind of, frustration and little fiddly details, it seems worth it when the thing is finally animated, and I just love it when I see it on stage. Like, basically people will commission me to make puppets for their shows. So sometimes, I send the puppet off, and then sometimes I never see it again. But, sometimes pictures or video comes back where I get to see it incorporated into the production or the advertisement or the, TV program or film or whatever. And it's so exciting to see it kind of have its own life. I just love that.
That's interesting. You get emotionally attached to your creations like that.
Well, yes and no. Like I want it to have a life. I want it to go have the life it's meant to have. I don't have to keep it with me though. But I love to see pictures. I love pictures of them.
I presume it would be difficult to store everything that you've ever created.
That I would have to have like a warehouse or something, because I have made hundreds of puppets, hundreds and hundreds.
Wow. And of course, I understand that you direct and produce both puppet-based plays and films. And I just wanted to ask you whether you thought, this may be a silly question, but do you think that there are things that you can achieve with one medium that you can't achieve with the other?
Well, I love puppetry because it's quite visual, but it's also a story. And it's also, the budget is low enough that, a regular person can put it together without the support of a giant, filmmaking company or something like that. That, a normal individual, they can get together enough funding to actually put this thing together. Like, you don't have to have a massive budget. And so I think it's like the voice of the people, basically. It's something that anybody can, anybody who has something to say, they can say it through puppetry without the same kind of barriers that we normally have. And I think also it is wonderful living in Britain because there is such a tradition of theater here as a way for people to, have a conversation about various issues. It's been really wonderful. I don't think the same measure of change could have come out of doing the show in America, for instance. I don't think it would have nearly as much impact, although it would have been dangerous for me actually to do it in America. But, if, just theoretically speaking, if I had done it there, I don't think it would have as much impact in terms of people actually coming together and organizing and changing laws, which is what happened in the UK. In America, there's less of a tradition of theater and more of a tradition of watching the television in your own living room, which isn't so much associated with activism. However,
That's interesting.
London,
I never thought of that.
Yes. In London, though, people do, they want to talk about stuff, So, here's theater. Here's something to talk about. But it's wonderful that there's also, comparing America to Britain. In America, there's so much less of an infrastructure in terms of as like a social safety net. So everybody's kind of on their own. People don't realize, because it's an isolated, the geography creates isolation. So people don't realize a lot of the things that Europeans realize in terms of the ways that people can work together to help each other instead of, oh, everybody's just on their own then, I guess. And because there's a history of more of a social safety net here, what happened when I brought Hooray for Hollywood to the theaters, when I performed it in theaters and, had a post-show discussion afterwards, then people, started to talk about this as first of all, being aware of the issue, then also being aware of the, how harmful it is, how devastating it is for children who have to suffer these things. And, what are the after effects? And also that the laws weren't effective enough at protecting the children, and they weren't being necessarily enforced well either. So at one point I got together an audience at a big charity. In the audience were most of the leading charities for child protection and people trying to protect trafficked people, like charities trying to protect trafficked people, along with the Home Office and the London City Hall. So I had this amazing audience where I was talking, showed them Hooray for Hollywood, talked with them about my own experience, and then we had a panel discussion talking about the different legal issues. And it was an amazing discussion, and it helped to influence a big set of laws that were set into place to protect trafficked people. Some of the things that were discussed in that setting, and with researchers afterwards, they put into law. So these little puppets, they're just little puppets. They're made out of, these particular ones are particularly flimsy because I just made them in a weekend, while I was in university. They're just flimsy little things, but they helped to reach people's hearts. They helped inspire productive conversations about change, and then they helped to inspire real change in the world through the change in laws and more enforcement in terms of existing laws. So I feel very, very proud of those little puppets.
Are you ever worried about, when you put on, a show like that, about even exposing yourself, I guess, or just upsetting anybody?
Well, I have to say it was rough when I first started performing the show, because I did get harassed. I did get harassed by some local people. I'd, naively spoken with a little neighborhood tabloid newspaper in London. It wasn't any of the big ones. It was just this little tiny little newspaper. And I didn't realize that they were going to try to sensationalize it and, do all these terrible things. I had no idea. So, they did and tried to make the theater that I'd performed at look bad. And it was just like, oh, come on.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really sad.
Always beware of those tiny newspapers. They seem to be incredibly dangerous.
Oh, they got to work hard to sell newspapers. So, yeah. Anyway, I had just moved to London, a year and a half before. So I didn't know. I just didn't know. I was just wanting to, spread the word and tell the truth. And I just didn't know. I was just naive. And anyway, so I was a bit shocked at the article they came up with from our interview. But what that did was also communicate to local pedophiles, I think, who started harassing me. So there was this kind of campaign of online harassment of me when I first started performing the show. And it was really unsettling. It was very, very upsetting. But then I realized, you know what? I've got a voice. It must be that if they're getting upset about this, it must mean that this is the way forward. Is there, here is the path to change, because sort of the right people were getting upset. I decided, no, well, this must be the way forward then. I must be doing the right thing. So I just increased my, outreach campaign. And, I just thought, all right, then more people need to know. And I did, I was able to kind of block the people who were harassing me. So the harassment stopped, but it was still unsettling, very unsettling.
It's a great story because it really made a difference.
Yes, it did. I worked on it for so many years, like the preparation, taking little workshops and writing a script and stuff before I came to England. It just took so many years, but I think I just had to do it that way because I kind of had to work up, to being, quite a private introvert to being kind of a more public person. So I was just like, well, all right.
I guess having the puppets too is, do you feel like they ever protect you?
Oh, yes. No, I couldn't just stand up. I couldn't have just stood up on stage and basically been one of the actors in the play. I mean, I was one of the puppeteers at one point, but I wasn't, I couldn't just, talk to the audience, face on about, hey, yeah, it's terrible things happen to me. I don't think it would have reached people's hearts in quite the same way for some adult to stand up and say, yes, this terrible thing happened to me when I was a child, versus a puppet where they're seeing it kind of in real time. They're seeing it in real time, what happens to these children and what the emotional effects are of dealing with these completely overwhelming, terrifying situations. So I think the puppets were definitely protected me in terms of feeling less exposed and kind of more able to show the sides of the story that I felt needed to be shown.
And is there any difference then when you're working with film instead of actual plays?
So, I mean, Hooray for Hollywood was both a play. It was started off as a live play, and then we made it into a film. When it was a live play, there was a lot of, one thing that was lovely about doing it live was the end of the show, the main character escapes the situation and starts to interact with the audience. And it was so moving to do that, and, to do that in the theater and to have people wanting, reaching out, wanting to help. It was incredibly moving. But creating it as a film, basically, I just went through, I had sort of a consulting person who worked with me. So I just went through the original script of the play and just word, kind of sentence by sentence, we kind of went over it together. And she suggested changes, and I'd be like, well, that sounds a little bit too glitzy or artificial, and that's not real or whatever. And so I would, she would make suggestions based on her kind of tastes in movies or whatever. And I would, decide if that was, if we should make that bit more visual, or should we add color, or, things like that. So I was trying to decide, but in the end, what I did was the film looks very similar to the play. It's, visually it's very, very similar. So even though, we have the potential to put these in these colorful settings, that's not what I wanted. I wanted people to focus on the experience of the children. And so that was, we kind of went with this sort of almost black and white aesthetic where it's the puppets are this kind of very pale and the background's just black. So I've worked on a lot of documentaries and making shadow animations for documentaries. So that's one thing that it's completely different from the process of making Hooray for Hollywood, in that usually the words are already given to me. Like usually the director of the film will give me words that need to be animated, or a section of the screenplay that needs to be animated. And so I go from that script and I create an animation from that using shadow puppetry. So all sorts of, black cut paper and colored transparent plastics, which create like this very rich, almost like a stained glass effect. So I'll make a storyboard first, and then I'll create the images according to the storyboard that help tell a story on top of the text that's from the screenplay. So somebody might be doing a voiceover while I'm doing, while they're seeing this animation. So it is a different process. I've also made 3-dimensional puppets for film. And one thing I really like about that for, commissions for other people's projects. And what I really like about that is that you can put so much detail into the puppet, and you can also make it really small if you want, because you can get up really close with the camera. But I just love, putting tons of details and things. I just really enjoy that. So it's nice seeing all the little textures of the sculpting and things like that.
Puppet Revolution, is that the name of your company?
Yes.
So that's the easiest way for people to keep up with your different projects, right?
Go to
the website.
My website is ravenkaliana.com.
Oh, okay. And are you very active on social media? Would you say that social media helps you in any way in your work?
Yes, I'm quite dependent on on Facebook. I think it's there's like quite a big network of puppeteers. So like worldwide puppeteers, it's quite a supportive and engaged community.
I was going to say, because just mentioning how your works have sort of encouraged discourses about all these different things. I think that a lot of people have been using social media, especially now, as a way to like communicate all these things. And I was wondering whether you noticed that it was definitely a useful platform for you in that sense as well.
I mean, I really strongly prefer live events. But I think I might have to get used to the whole, online, Zoom type performances. I don't know. It's a bit frustrating to me because
Have you been asked to do that?
Well, yeah, I've been asked to kind of do online presentations and online workshops, but it's just so much easier in person.
But I did want to go back to your style a little bit and just ask you whether you've noticed that over the years your style has evolved, and whether there are any things or any elements or even art forms that influence the style of yours.
I think that probably the closest thing would be like Frida Kahlo, where she's creating a self-portrait that isn't very, that's quite raw, that's quite honest. And I would think about my own work that I do want to show some raw edges to it. I do want people to, see a truth that they hadn't ever considered. But I think I would say my work is more about change. So it's not so much about, me using it for my own processing, because I've already done lots of things for my own processing. And for me, it's different to do things for my own processing than it is to create a performance for other people. Like, it's a completely different thing, where with a performance for other people, I want to make it engaging and entertaining, but thought-provoking, moving. I want people to emotionally engage with it, but not for my sake, but for the sake of change, and how, kind of help to guide them through conversation. through a discussion. How can we make this better? And empowering people. I think that's really important for me, is to empower people. And my new show is actually Love versus Trauma. And that one I toured to Beijing, I toured to Puerto Rico and Greece just this last year. And it was just so powerful to talk with groups of people about trauma recovery. Like, how do we do it? What helps facilitate that? And what can we do in community with each other? What's the community that we want for each other, that we want for ourselves, that we want for our children and our grandchildren? What's the world we want to build together? And trauma actually blocks your vision of the future. It kind of narrows your vision down only to the present tense, which is why that's such a big political tool to keep people in a state of trauma. So what helps to subvert that actually is to come together in groups, to talk with people about common issues, and to talk with people about how they're feeling about it, and to make a space for those emotions, and to make a space for that reality, and also to talk together about how can you change things together. So I think puppetry is an amazing medium, and I would love to do more in person, but I'll do some online as well.
Yeah. And can you tell me a little bit more about that one, actually? Because I do think it's very interesting. What's the story?
Well, the story is basically a child who grows up in a setting where she feels quite isolated. And there's a metaphor of an iceberg, like growing up on an iceberg. So the isolation is what gives the perpetrator a sense of power over her, and what makes her feel helpless. So she starts to kind of mentally leave the situation through fantasy, through spirituality, through daydreams, and she starts to dream of a different way that things could be. And she starts to get some feelings of validation that maybe she's willing to take a chance and find out what's beyond the edges of this isolated situation that she's in. And then she ends up finding support. She decides to take a chance, and she finds support, like a whole new set of human beings, really, that she can start to bond with and navigate, these relationships. And she rebuilds her life. And then there is a sense of joy and blossoming at the end.
I wanted to ask you, just to go back to you trying to understand your life through the arts and all that. Do you still feel like you're trying to understand? Do you still feel like that process is good for you to try to understand life at large in the world around you?
Well, I mean, I do a lot of journaling because I still get, post-traumatic stress symptoms sometimes. And so when that sort of thing kind of like intrudes, then I do a lot of journaling. And, but I don't think of my journals as being like, a performance. It's like, this is my private little thing, my private little space where I can kind of, I don't know, extract these confused or difficult or painful feelings out onto a piece of paper, and then, shut the cover.
Awesome, Raven. Thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate that. It was awesome.
All right. Really wonderful speaking with you. Good questions. All right. Take good care, Matt.